So we just got another piece of really unfortunate evidence as to why the United States, the European Union, the UN, Russia, and everybody else should not be meddling in the Middle East and fucking around in the Syrian civil war. ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whichever particular variant of Islamic fundamental armed militant terrorist groups or whatever the fuck you want to call them, they started shelling, I guess, with mortars into an area full of government backing civilian refugees. 3,000 government refugees were waiting to be evacuated from one town on a front line to somewhere else. And these ISIS guys or Al-Qaeda guys or whichever group it happens to be started shelling into this group of them and killed something like 130 people, of which they say 60 to 70 were children. Whichever group it was that was doing this had to have known that they would kill children, and they didn't care. This kind of stuff happens all the time in the Middle East. It happens when Sunni terrorists blow up some Shia folks who are just going to the mosque. And they blow up 100 or 150 people. They kill women and children when they do that. They don't care. They don't have any regard for human life in the way that Western people typically do. And if you see someone say that on an internet forum, like Yahoo News or something, they're full of shit anyway. They might really think that. They might say it on the internet, but they're not going to stand up in public and say, yeah, we should be bombing women and children. Whereas in the Middle East, it actually happens. They do it. They take credit for it. They claim it. They're proud of it. The only other group that I can think of that will bomb refugees, women and children, and take it as a matter of course are the leaders of the Western countries, and particularly the neoconservatives. For them, it typically is a side effect of something else they're trying to achieve. They want to blow up some building and there happens to be a hospital or an orphanage next door, and they say, fuck it. If they get killed, they get killed. Just blow them up anyway. Or they killed journalists or whatever. They don't really care about that either. They're mostly worried about the PR damage. But I guess ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these other people are even worse than our neoconservatives in the West, if that's possible, because they're deliberately targeting women and children. And for anyone who thinks that Assad needs to go, I think that you are either mentally deficient or you're wearing your rose-tinted glasses and you think that somehow some rebels who support Western-style human rights programs are somehow going to get into power. It's never going to happen. They just don't share our values. So, if Assad goes, you're probably going to get some type of ISIS-style people who are okay with bombing, shelling women and children to death, refugees to death, in power, or you'll just get another 10 years of civil war in which the ISIS people and the ISIS light rebels continue to fight each other over territory. And also, you're going to continue to disgorge more refugees into Europe, have the neoliberals in the United States put up a more convincing, whining argument for why we need to let these people come to our country. But the problem with all that, the folks over there who are fighting are all drawn from the same kind of population. They have similar values. So the women and children who got blown up today probably have similar values to the people who are shelling them. Maybe they're a little bit more secular, or maybe they're Alawis or Druze or whatever the hell they happen to be, but they're not going to have completely different values just because they got blown up and you happen to feel sorry for them. So what I would suggest is get the fuck out of there, stop attacking Assad, stop supporting anyone, let the dust settle. I really don't want ISIS to win, but I don't think that the majority of people over there want that kind of government anyway. I think the majority of them would probably prefer to live under Assad. I think the only reason that the rebels have gotten this far for so long is because they're being armed by Saudi, by us, probably by, God knows, maybe even by Israel and everybody else too, just because they want Assad gone. This might get me banned in Europe, but that's okay. The way that I think about Islamic culture and Middle Eastern culture is that it's inevitably going to produce more authoritarian dictatorships. It's kind of like African culture. I don't think that colonialism is totally responsible for the failure of African countries to achieve at the level of Western democracy. I think that exploitation by capitalism in the West probably contributes 10 or 20% to the failures of the Middle East and of Africa. But I think that the rest is due to the failures of the people and the failures of the culture. It's their own damn fault. So the more humanitarian aid that you contribute to the Middle East and to Africa, the more you're encouraging the dictatorial governments that rule the place and create miserable outcomes for their people. Europe was like this too at one point, and it evolved out of it. It aged out of it. The culture changed. So when you have a culture that will use chemical weapons on its own people, or you have a culture that will bomb refugees, or a culture in which you blow up people's churches all the time, you're not going to see good government come out of that. And that's not to say that all Africans and all Arabs are bad people. They're not. But the overwhelming majority of people have their mindset in a culture and a way of life that's, 600, 800, 1,000 years back in time. So I think those are the roots of the problem. It's sad, but the more that we intervene in the Middle East, Africa, or the really bad parts of Asia, you're just going to get mud on your shoes, basically, from going over there and trying to stop these problems. Why do you think that after trillions of dollars in aid that the situation in these countries doesn't get much better, and that all you're doing is breeding more people that the governments continue to abuse and create bad outcomes for? So I apologize if that sounds pessimistic, but to me it's pretty simple. That's just the way it is. So when you hear about ISIS or Al-Qaeda or whoever it happens to be blowing up Syrian children, go ahead and cry for the dead children, but don't think that you're going to be able to change the outcomes over there. The people in those countries are going to have to solve their own problems, and they're going to have to stack up a lot more bodies before they get to that point. And it may take another 300 or 400 years. Islam and Middle Eastern culture may have to erode its strength before they can actually move forward. And all of the Westerners who promote Islam, who promote multiculturalism, and who pander to these people are going to make that process take even longer. And all of the Westerners who donate aid money and encourage these regimes are going to make it take another 200 years. So the best thing to do would be to provide a good role model for Africa and a good role model for the Middle East. And don't let the enterprising individuals who want something better come to the West. Don't let them come. Force them to stay in their own countries and change it for the better. And until that takes hold, takes root, and flourishes, you're going to see those dead children on the TV. You might as well get used to it, because you're going to see the dead children on the television regardless of what you do for the rest of your life, because that's just the period that you've been born into history. It's going to happen. But try to think about long-term historical processes and what you can do personally in your own life to work with those and maybe speed them up, rather than saying, we're going to eliminate poverty in our lifetime. No child should ever go hungry in our lifetime. Well, that's bullshit. Children are going to starve to death long after we're all dead and gone. And it's best to come to grips with that kind of stuff now, rather than fool yourself and, get caught up in some ridiculous humanitarian eschatology. Sorry to be so pessimistic, but that's the way I think it is.